Hello, Garland Nixon here. It's Thursday morning. We're hanging out with Scott Ritter. There's all manner of madness going on, and Scott's going to sort it all out for us. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we are hanging out with Scott Ritter. We got a lot to talk about today, and of course, put a heavy burden on Scott's shoulders. We got all kind of madness, political madness, military madness, all kinds of things, and we're gonna get see what Scott has to say. Let's start here, Scott. You know, when you see the way military is supposed to be. You're supposed to have civilian leadership determining policy, and then they send it to the military people, and then they say, okay, this is what you want to do. We can do it. We can't do it. This is how we can do it. And then if you say it, we'll do our best to do it. Okay. But here's my other thoughts, and you can't overlook this. I watched this video the other day of Pete Hegseth bench pressing 315. Get me. And I thought, the level of civilian leadership is so incompetent. Quite frankly, it's horrifying. Your thoughts on this? The whole concept can't work if people like Pete Hegseth are in charge. That's just my thoughts. Anyway, Scott, your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I have said from day one, Pete Hegseth is unsuited and unqualified for the position of Secretary of Defense. I want to remind people that legally it's the Secretary of Defense. Congress hasn't changed it, and it's one of those things that Congress has to weigh in on. He at best could have been a battalion operations officer. I don't think he was qualified for battalion command. I don't know if he would have gotten through the board with a lot of the issues that had followed him in his career. But that's it. And battalion operations officers are, one step removed from company commanders, and company commanders are one step removed from platoon commanders, and platoon commanders will go lift weights with their troops on occasion. And so, that's Pete Hegseth's mind. He thinks he's a troop leader. He's not. He's not even close. He's supposed to be civilian leadership of the Army. He's not supposed to be some sort of, proxy troop leader that parachutes in and runs with the boys and lifts weights with the boys and high fives with the boys and parties with the boys. You're supposed to be in Washington, D.C., overseeing, policy formulation, supporting policy, making sure that the Department of Defense is up to the task of accomplishing its strategic missions. Half the stuff that Hegseth's dipping his fingers into, he shouldn't be. There's, you delegate authority. That's one of the big tests of leadership. He has a lot of assistant secretaries of defense and deputy assistant secretaries of defense and generals that should be out there leading troops. In the Marine Corps, if a division commander found a regiment commander in the weight room lifting weights instead of coordinating a staff meeting or something, he'd probably relieve him on the spot. And Pete Hegseth should be relieved on the spot. He's incompetent in the job that he's doing. He has alienated the military. Look, you can go to the Rakkasans, the paratroopers, and you can get a bunch of testosterone-fueled boys in there who are willing to, do stupid things. These are the same guys that go out and get drunk on Friday night in bars and throw dollar bills at strippers. It's the same mentality, sitting there doing the oorah testosterone lifting. Look, I'm not against lifting weights. Several times a week, I go to the gym. I don't do 315. That's for damn sure. Wish I could. Sort of jealous, but I lift weights because strength. It's part of trying to be fit. There's nothing against that, but you don't turn it into performance theater. That's not what leadership is. The leadership that he should be providing is the classic leadership of when the Secretary of Defense gets behind the podium and speaks to the nation, people should be sitting up and listening to the words, and those words should reflect deep intellectual thought. They're not there for some, testosterone-fueled cheerleading session. It's not why we have a Secretary of Defense. Pete Hegseth's mind is incapable of wrapping itself around that. He thinks he's supposed to be a cheerleader. He thinks he's supposed to be lifting weights, running, doing push-ups. And as a result, the Department of Defense is failing across the board. Across the board, it's failing because you can't run an organization of that size, by lifting weights. You run that organization by, managing people, managing departments, managing budgets, managing things. What kind of budget management does this guy have to do when the president is, in effect, almost tripling the size of his budget? There's no management. Just throw money. Instead of what he was supposed to be doing is cutting money. Cap Weinberger was the Secretary of Defense. Dick Cheney was a Secretary of Defense who did a good job as Secretary of Defense before he went all neocon crazy. We've had good Secretaries of Defense. Pete Hegseth is a horrible Secretary of Defense.
Let me ask you this, and it's something I've wondered about, because you are a Marine, and I'm not sure you'll know whether the Marines are part of the Navy or extension of the Navy or vice versa, but I know the Marines and the Navy are, shall we say, inextricably linked in some manner, right? Here's my question. There is, viral now, the whole issue of the George W. Bush or whatever and the sewage issues, to a point where it's Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford and the sewage issues, to the point where it's kind of like almost embarrassing, a laughing stock kind of thing, right? Now, I thought a couple of things of it. I'm like, I wonder if maybe the stories aren't true, but I see so much. I'm like, yeah, I think that's got to be true. Is it leaked out? Are there people in the military? Is it anyway? You've seen all the stuff that I've seen out there. Give me your evaluation of the circumstances and the situation.
Other than saying it's a pretty crappy situation.
Kind of knew that was coming.
Look, Gerald Ford is a brand new ship, most modern ship in the U.S. fleet. And, before it was, made operational, brought in and signed off on by the U.S. Navy, it underwent a number of trial runs, tests, etc. And so the sewage system should have been put through the ringers. There was a lot of problems with the Gerald Ford. Its new catapult system was problematic. There's just a whole bunch of things when you have a new class of shipping. I don't know the specifics of the toilet system. Did they try some new, highly motivated, vacuum suction technology, that was sold to the Pentagon because this is the newest and greatest ship? So how can we suck another $100 million out of the American people by, saying these toilets, they're, flushless toilets, or they use less water, or they do something. I don't know. What I do know is that it appears that the toilet system doesn't work and the sewage system has failed, and that the poop decks are covered in poop. And if you want to ruin the morale of a crew, you just did it. So you've got a crew that's already got morale issues. They've been on a 6-month pump. They were supposed to go home, and now they're being extended to go over and sail off the coast of Israel in support of an operation that may or may not be happening. But when you wake up in the morning and you smell shit, and you've got to go take a shit, and there's no place to take a shit, it's a pretty shitty situation, and morale will collapse immediately. And bad morale is never good for anything. So I think the Navy's got a problem. Now, having said this, these are professionals, and they will adapt to the situation. I'm sure the Navy's got a plan B. And, whether they set up porta-johns, I imagine as the ship sailed past Italy, there were helicopters flying out to the carrier bringing porta-johns. And I imagine they've taken part of the hangar deck and they've created an entire line of porta-johns, and that they brought in some pump capabilities to pump it and dump the sewage straight into the water to alleviate the situation. Because there are innovative people in the Navy, and their job is to come up with innovative solutions, and they'll find a solution to these problems. But we've all been to, the football game or the concert, and we know what happens in porta johns, and they become just as bad as not having anything. So again, morale is an issue, but these are professionals, and at the end of the day, they will do their duty. They will execute the job. They will do what they're called upon to do. They're not going to go on strike. They're not going to do it. Right. It could impact retention. These are the kind of things that when people come back, because normally when you have an extended pump like this, it's in support of a national security emergency. And so it's up to the leadership at that point in time to sell it to the guys and commend the guys. And they come back and they'll get a unit commendation that they get to put on and say, this is because we did that extra 3 months, supporting, Operation, kill the Ayatollah. And they'll look at it, and that's how the military operates. They got something on their chest. They go, yeah, I'm pretty proud of that. I mean, I have 2 joint unit commendations. When I was on, I'd say, yeah, I got this one because I got the first one for implementing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. The On-Site Inspection Agency was given a joint unit commendation to do that. That's pretty cool. And then the other one was for Desert Storm, for being on General Schwarzkopf's staff. So I can sit there and go, yeah, this is a unit commendation, but this is what I did. This is part of the team I was part of. I'm pretty proud of this. So you can turn a bad situation into something that is enhancing. And you can reward the people who do this too. But if sailors feel like they're being used, if sailors feels like they're being abused, remember, they have families at home. They built a life around a deployment. The wife did certain things, went to live with people or made certain arrangements, and they tore their life apart. And then it was designed to be brought back together again on schedule. And now they're going away, which means families have to adapt. The Navy doesn't give a damn. I mean, that's the sad reality of it. So the wife now, hey, honey, we're extended. I'm going in there, send toilet paper. And, but now she has to deal with this stuff and pick that up. And that's a big morale thing. Marriages fall apart. And if you want to watch a guy's morale go down, watch a guy go out on a pump, think that he's married to a woman that loves him and they have baby on the way. And halfway through the pump, he gets the Dear John letter that says, no, I can't do this. This is not the life I signed up to do. I need a husband home. The kid needs a husband home, and marriages fall apart. And that's a morale buster. So this is a big deal, this extension, and how the Navy deals with this, how the Secretary of Defense deals with this is critical.
It reminds me of something that we don't think about. The talk is always about, how many missiles we have, what kind of missiles, air defenses, all those kind of things, right? But you've heard the old adage, an army runs on its belly. You got to have food. But other things, I remember reading something about a British army or something in the Second World War, and they had an issue, like they were in the desert, and it was like, basically they didn't properly do what they needed to do when they did number 2 in the desert, and flies came in and it spread, dysentery and all kinds of disease. And like this army fell apart from sickness, right? People forget that there are human beings here. And that on top of all of these other things going on, they got to have food. They got to have proper health issues. Okay, these guys are all ready, and they're like, well, I know boating, so ships, they're small, they're cramped. You can't take a lot of smelly things or it'll go bad and overheated and they got to cook. So you only think of the sewage from the perspective of going to the bathroom. You have to cook. You have to have sinks. You have to wash with hot water. What happens if you're hot water, you're cold water, all these other things. But the other part of it is these are human beings. And in order for these guys to, so what happens now? You're like, okay, well, the good news is we got porta-johns. The bad news is everybody's sick. They got diarrhea. They got this. They got that because bacteria is growing. People are sick as a dog. You know, that's the other side of it too. The health issues and the other things that people forget about when all they think about is like these people are robots. Robots don't get sick. These people have all these other things.
Yeah, I don't know the extent to which, I mean, what you're talking about is 100% a health issue. You know, it's a sanitation issue. And we don't know what's wrong with the sewage system. Has it leached into the water filtration system? Is the water contaminated? Therefore, now we need helicopters flying in with pallets of water. And now the troops, instead of being able to drink water from the galley and all that, you know, get issued bottles of water. And I've been on ships before where you have to do that because it was a destroyer. But you know, the internal water system was contaminated, so you're drinking bottled water, and that, you know, adds to everything. It all adds up. You know, I think history is going to show. Again, I hate, this is very speculative of me, so certainly. Forgive me.
Take it into context. That's all we can do.
History will show that the Gerald Ford was rushed into operational service, and we know that to be the case because we know that the new advanced, you know, electric catapult system wasn't working when they brought it in, and they went out there and they were trying to fix it on the run, and then I don't know if they actually eventually replaced it with the steam catapult system, but we know that the ship was rushed into service because we wanted to create the impression of power. And if a ship has a problem like that, there's an engineering problem, a fundamental engineering flaw, and that usually is just an isolated event. Usually it's, you know, symptomatic of larger issues with the ship. And I think history is going to show that the Gerald Ford is just one giant lemon, a $13 billion lemon that, you know, represents, again, what a mismanaged Department of Defense or Department of the Navy, in this case, is capable of doing. This didn't need to happen, but it could. In order to prevent it, you need effective management. And what's happened a lot lately is that we get, you know, especially when you get into defense industry and shipbuilding, also, it gets politicized. The propagandists come in, and so instead of doing it right, you do it in a way that makes it sound right. But you're covering up flaws. And I think history is going to show that the Gerald Ford is a lemon. And, you know, if it keeps breaking down like this on floats, maybe they need to just bring it in and gut it and start all over again.
Yeah, I would argue that's what I thought. At this point, you need to bring it in and do some serious look. Well, look, how many times have we seen they bring out a new model car? And the first year, people are like, don't buy the first year. They redid the car because we don't. And then they find out the brake systems are this or that. Okay, those things happen. And you're talking about a $13 billion ship like this. Anyway, so let's move on. I did want to ask you about this, something that a lot of people have been reporting, but let's talk about these two things. And I hope it's not true, but God only knows. You have to understand the mentality of Europe. But number one, these lunatics now, there are claims by the Russians that they have credible evidence that the UK and France may be trying to literally send nuclear weapons and a means of propulsion and delivery into Ukraine, number one, and add that with firing a missile, allegedly the Ukrainians, we know how that works, fired a missile into Russia to hit, I think it's Voltynsk, the place that you were, the missile factory. Which of course now you're saying we're going to send nukes and you're attacking their strategic nuclear plants. Those two things together start to put together something that horrifies me and could get us all killed. Anyway, your thoughts on all that stuff. That's why I said them both, because I think you have to take them both together in context.
Oh no, they're related. Okay, we're talking about two separate events. We're talking about a missile attack that took place on the night of February 20th and 21st. The Ukrainians fired 5 FP5, that's the name of the model of Flamingo ground-launched cruise missiles, long-range heavy strike. They have a 1,000-pound warhead, or maybe even more than that, 1,500 pounds. And it can travel in ranges of 1,300 to 1,500 kilometers. So it's deep strike, heavy strike. They fired 6. 5 got shot down. 1 made it through and struck Vodkinsk, the Vodkinsk machine building plant. This is actually plant number 237, I think is the name. That's a name that goes back to the Second World War, when Kiev was about to be captured by the Germans. They dismantled one of the major, I think it was the Red Arsenal or something, defense industry, and broke it up and loaded it on the trains. And literally, as the Germans are coming in, the last trains are rolling out. And some of these trains went to Vodkinsk, where they transferred the light anti-tank manufacturing capability. So Vodkinsk became a place that it used to produce locomotives and stuff, and now it converted to defense industry. And Plant 237 was doing that. Later on, when Ustinov was the Minister of Defense Industry, he made a decision to produce Scud missiles at Vodkinsk, to go from artillery systems to Scuds. And so Vodkinsk became a factory that started producing missiles. These were liquid-fueled missiles. If you were to go to Vodkinsk today, which is probably impossible to do now given what's going on, and if you were to gain access to the main factory building downtown, which again is probably impossible today given what's going on, they have a little museum there, and you would see the 8K-14 Scud missile there. This is one of the mainstays. This is something they're very well known for. They produced the Scud missile, and they produced that from the 50s all the way up until the late 1980s. You would also look at their museum, and you would see that they produced the SS-12, which was the replacement for the SS-4 and the SS-5 intermediate range missiles. SS-4 and SS-5 were the missiles used during the Cuban Missile Crisis. SS-12 was a solid rocket road mobile missile that replaced it. Vodkinsk produced that. You would also see that Vodkinsk produced the SS-16, which is a road mobile intercontinental ballistic missile. You see the model there. But when they produced this, they took because now we're talking about large cast solid rocket motors that if they blow up, take the whole city out. So they went outside the town, about 15 kilometers outside the town, and built a new facility called the Vodkinsk Missile Final Assembly Facility. And this is where the big stuff goes. It goes out there to be assembled. The SS-16, the SS-20, the SS-25, the SS-27, the Yars, the Yars-M, the Bulava, the Oreshnik, the follow-on missiles that we haven't even heard of, the Courier system, which was their small ICBM, the Skoros, which is another small missile, all assembled out there because of their things. But that's an assembly plant. What is happening in Vodkinsk is they are producing the various parts that go into the missile, the connecting parts, the post-boost vehicle, the warhead bus. These are all produced in Vodkinsk, and they use exotic materials and exotic welding. A story from Vodkinsk when Chernobyl went bad. They had to go in and repair things in the reactor under emergency conditions. Vodkinsk mobilized a specialist team of welders who use X-rays to inspect the welding. And so they're experts at nuclear radio imaging in support of welding. And they went to Chernobyl to do the welding and inspect all the welds in the plant after the explosion to make it safe. And some of these guys were guys who worked with us. But Vodkinsk is a very specialist plant. So even though the Missile Final Assembly plant is outside of the city, the parts, the connectors, the specialist technologies, the unique welding, the galvanizing technologies to special coat the materials and all this are all done there. One of the plants in Plant 235 workshop is Workshop 19. Workshop 19 does specialist, metal forming. So they'll cast pieces, they'll forge pieces. So they have specialist machinery in there that does this. And then they take these parts and then they have to coat them. And the coating isn't just normal, galvanization. They have to coat it to protect it, to shield it from radiation. One of the things when you deal with these road mobile missiles is when they are elevated, ready into a launch, if a nuclear bomb hits near them, it'll blow it over. But one of the dangers is that the radiation will create a cloud of radioactivity that the missile still has to launch through. And if the missile isn't shielded properly from that radiation, it will fail on the way up. The radiation will destroy components, et cetera. So there's specialized treatment that goes into that. That's all done at Workshop 19. And that workshop supports multiple production lines and multiple assembly lines. So that might have been one of the bottlenecks of production. So if you destroy Workshop 19 and you destroy this capability, because like anything, you have tools that come in. Okay, what's our work order today? All right, now we're doing the Oreshnik connector. Boom, 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 boom. Do it. What's the next work order? Okay, we've got the Iskander, connector series B12. They do it, flush it out. What's our next order? But that's the bottleneck that was destroyed. So you could be destroying, or impeding Russia's ability to produce missiles that are essential for the national security of Russia. Votkins is a unique facility, a one-of-a-kind facility, and it was struck. So there's that. Why was it struck? It was struck by a Flamingo missile. As we said, what is the Flamingo? It's a British-made system. Forget the Ukrainian thing. That's just garbage. Guys, do your research. FP, Firepoint, is a Ukrainian industrial entity who's headed up by a cute-looking girl who has no specialist in anything. She's a grifter, scam artist, as most Ukrainian business people are. But she has no experience in doing any of this. She does marketing. She made money, doing particularly dark scams, and she's already under investigation for overselling Firepoint and collecting money she shouldn't have collected. But she's a front to give the Flamingo a Ukrainian face. But the missile was designed by a British company, Millennium, UK headquarters, a production hub in Abu Dhabi. They built this missile. In fact, it was rolled out not in Ukraine, but at a military exposition in Abu Dhabi in January or February of 2025. A British system. It uses, though, components that can be found in Ukraine or the former Soviet Union. For instance, its propulsion system is a turbojet engine that's used on like L-39 Albatrosses and other Soviet-era aircraft that used to be produced at the Motor Sich factory in Zaporizhia in Ukraine. Thousands of these engines were produced, and therefore you have access. You don't have to build a whole new engine. You just have to bring in this engine and make sure that it operates one time good. That's your propulsion system. The frame is a derivative of the Tupolev 143 or 146. Both were drones used by the Soviets. Basically, it's a cruise missile that flies out on a pattern, takes photographs, and then comes back and then parachutes in, and you get the cameras. During the early part of this war, the Ukrainians repurposed these and used them as attack drones, and they would fire these into Russia. And so the idea is, rather than repurposing these drones, why don't we build our own capability? But Ukraine couldn't. They lacked the capacity to do this. Their industries were, but Motor Sich was literally taken off the map in February. And so what the British did is they designed a system that could be assembled in Ukraine and made to look like it was Ukrainian. But the component parts could be procured, developed, built up outside of Ukraine, and then you ship in the parts to a final assembly plant like Votkins, and they assemble it, and then they call it a Ukrainian missile. And so they did that. Why did they have to do this? Because Russia has said from day one, and this is the most important part of this, Russia has said from day one they will not tolerate NATO long-range strike capability stationed on Ukrainian soil. If you go back to before the conflict began in December of 2021, the Russians submitted 2 draft treaties, one to the United States, one to NATO, which they made this one of the cornerstone. Article 6 of the U.S. draft treaty, Article 5 of the NATO draft treaty, no long range, no intermediate range or short range missiles be stationed on the territory of Ukraine. Putin called Biden in December and said, this is very important to us. And we ignored it. We dismissed these treaties. We ignored it. In the conflict, we started providing Scalp missiles, Storm Shadow missiles, the French and the British, air-launched cruise missiles, 250-kilometer range. We provided ATACMS missiles, 300-kilometer range. But we limited the targets they could strike to that territory, which was Ukraine after 1991, which has subsequently been either absorbed by Russia or occupied by Russia, depending on your point of view. The Russians said, okay, we understand that, but you can't use it against Russia proper. And in September of 2024, remember, Keir Starmer tried to get Joe Biden to sign off on a document that would allow Storm Shadow and ATACMS to be used in long range. And the Russians at that time drew a red line and said, no, we could use nuclear weapons in response to this. Because Ukraine sits like a mailed fist in the stomach of Russia. Look at the map, guys. You have the Russian Federation. Ukraine just sits right there in the gut. When it was the Soviet Union, Ukraine was part of the team. And the missile launch potential was pushed very far westward. In fact, you had the Warsaw Pact, so it was even more westward. There's a reason why Russia didn't, insisted on the not 1 inch eastward concept of NATO expansion, because they didn't want NATO territory to encroach on the Russian Federation. As NATO expands, things happen. Like in 2014, a Mark 41 Aegis Ashore missile system was installed in Romania and went operational. This is a system, when it's on a ship, fires the SM-3 anti-air, anti-missile missile. The SM-6 can do that, but also be converted to a ground strike, the Typhoon, and the Tomahawk missile. It's all in a modular capability. You have a launcher, and you can call it the missiles, and they fire. And the Russians said, you can't be putting that launcher there. That's like putting a Tomahawk missile launcher. But Tomahawk was prohibited by the INF Treaty. The United States said, well, doesn't worry. We got the INF Treaty. And 2, we've hit some wires, and we've wrapped it up, and it can't fire a Tomahawk, and it will never fire a Tomahawk. Then we put one in Poland. And the Russians were like, guys, this is aimed at us. And we said, no, it's for the Iranians. It only uses this SM-3 missile that, they can't shoot down real missiles. They should only shoot down the Iranian missiles. Then we turned around, and first of all, we installed an SM-3 Mark IV Block II, which is designed to shoot down intercontinental ballistic missiles, Russian missiles. We lied. And then we installed the SM-6, designed to shoot down Russian ICBMs. We lied. And then we withdrew from the INF Treaty, and a week later, we fired a Tomahawk missile from a Mark 41 Aegis Ashore launch tube. We lied, because we can convert them anytime. So suddenly now the Russians have 2 launch facilities right at their border that can launch Tomahawk missiles. And they said, this is problematic for us. And so they said, we don't want you to put similar capability inside Ukraine. That's why Ukraine can never join NATO, and NATO can't deploy missiles into Ukraine. This is a red line. And so now what Ukraine has done, what the British have done, is said, well, NATO can't put missiles in, but what if the Ukrainians develop their own missile? And they built them a missile, and it's called a Ukrainian missile. But it's built by Great Britain. It's guided to its target using German guidance systems. The intelligence comes from the United States. So when this Ukrainian missile is launched, it's designed by the British to strike deep into the Russian strategic interior using German guidance, American intelligence. It's a NATO attack against Russia, literally a NATO attack against Russia. And this is problematic because now the game has changed, because what Russia said can never be allowed to happen just happened. A NATO missile was fired from Ukrainian soil into the strategic interior of Russia, striking one of the most important defense industry facilities in all of Russia. So now we move over to the next one. Ukraine has always maintained this mythology of 1994. Budapest, We gave up our nuclear weapons. If we had nuclear weapons, Russia would never been able to do this. They were never Ukraine's nuclear weapons. They were Soviet nuclear weapons that when the Soviet Union collapsed ended up on Ukrainian soil. But all the launch codes and all that operational control was with Russia. Ukraine never controlled these weapons. And indeed, early on, part of the deal of Ukrainian independence was they signed a pledge to join the nuclear nonproliferation treaties and non-nuclear weapon states. So they said right up front, we don't want these weapons. But then they realized that they could scam the United States and Russia into billions of dollars of profits for Ukraine by saying, yeah, but before we give them to you, we'd like you to give us some money. And we need money from the Russians. We need money from the Americans. We need security guarantees to drag this thing out. It was one giant grift. It was one giant scam. The Ukrainians never wanted these weapons ever, 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 ever because there's no utility for them. So it's a myth today where the Ukrainians say we were forced to give up our weapons. No, they weren't. They gave up their weapons because that was the only way they're going to become independent. And the security guarantees that they talk about weren't security guarantees. Go talk to any lawyer. They'll tell you there's no commitment here. None whatsoever. None. There's no legal obligation to do anything. And also go to the negotiating record and take a look at how Bill Clinton felt about the Ukrainians after being grifted by them one too many times. The scam. Disgusted by them. Disgusted. And the Russians. Because all the Ukrainians wanted was money. Money, 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 money. Security had nothing to do with this. This was a scam from day one. But today it's been turned into this mythology that if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, none of this would happen. So what is happening apparently, and let me put it this way. The source of the information that you're talking about the British and the French, is from the Russian intelligence service. And so I just want to remind people that intelligence services aren't in the PR business. They don't exist to gather intelligence and report to the public. It's a very rare occasion when the intelligence service will do so directly. Normally, intelligence is provided to the executive branch of a government, and that branch makes a decision whether they want a Kremlin spokesperson or a White House spokesperson to make reference to this intelligence. But it's rare that the intelligence service takes the lead in this. So why did the SVR do this? Because I think they want to impart on people that this is real. This is real. And now, by releasing this, though, what are they trying to accomplish? If this was a source they had right next to Emmanuel Macron, they wouldn't burn it like this. You're not going to burn a source like this. So they wouldn't have released the information, or they would have done it some other way. This tells me that this is very low-level chatter, and that it's not about a decision that's been made. It's about conversations that are being held at a very low level about, I would imagine, now that the nuclear again, New START's done, guys. Finished. Gone. Okay? Poland's talking about building nuclear weapons. Germany is silently saying, we're probably going to get them too. Turkey won't answer the question about whether or not they're going to get nuclear weapons. Basically,
and they're getting threatened by Israel. So why wouldn't, let's be honest, why wouldn't Turkey think about it? Anyway, continue.
Well, they are thinking about it. They're probably going to do it. So the nuclear nonproliferation treaty is dead, finished, gone. And as a result, there are people saying, in a post-conflict environment, what's one of the security guarantees we can give Ukraine? They have the Flamingo missile built by the British. And so they're saying, what if Russia gave Belarus nuclear weapons? What if we give Ukraine nuclear weapons, a similar arrangement to the one that Russia did with Belarus and the Oreshnik? What if we give Ukraine nuclear weapons? Then the question is, what nuclear weapon do you give them? Well, they already have the Flamingo, which is a Ukrainian weapon. So you miss out on the point of, we have to give them a French missile or British missile or something like that. They have the system. I think the French have a warhead, my memory could be right, TN-75, tactical nuclear 75. It's a small yield, low yield warhead that fits on French missiles, or fits on the old Pluton missile, I believe it was. And they've kept these in reserve. So the French are saying we could provide these warheads that could be outfitted on flamingos to give Ukraine a nuclear deterrence capability in a post-conflict environment. I'm guessing this is what the conversation was. Just reverse engineering the pieces and knowing what I know about intelligence and what you're allowed to say and what you can't say in public. You don't burn really high-level sources. So there's low-level chatter in certain circles outside of the major decision-making circles about post-conflict Ukraine, how to convert a flamingo into a nuclear-capable system so that Ukraine now has a nuclear deterrence to prevent any future Russian attack, using a French warhead that could be that the British would work to adapt to the flamingo airframe, something of that nature. So I think the Russians are just coming out saying no, no, and we'll be clear what the consequences will be. The consequences will be that Ukraine will cease to exist, and so will France, and so will the United Kingdom. So now that you know what the consequences are, maybe stop having your little low-level chatter. And the first thing, the Ukrainians have come out, this isn't true. We're not talking about this. This isn't happening. This and that. So I think that's what's going on here. But the flamingo, all it does is reinforce just how dangerous this system is. If anybody here thinks that this war ends with Ukraine possessing a flamingo launch capability, I think you're misguided. I could be wrong, but Russia having drawn that red line and having insisted, having threatened not once but twice to have a nuclear war based upon long-range missiles stationed on their soil. Now that Ukraine has this, for instance, the current ceasefire negotiations, Lavrov has talked about Alaska, and he said, look, we came in and Vladimir Putin made very painful concessions to Trump, very painful. And the concessions appear to be to agree to freeze the front line and where it stands in Kherson and Zaporizhia, so that Ukraine holds on to the territory it holds on, Russia gets what it gets, but all of the Donbass goes to Russia. These were the territorial concessions. What's curious is, and you know this in your audience, is I had said this is impossible. Remember? I said constitutionally, there's no way Vladimir Putin could do this. There's no way Vladimir Putin would do this. I was wrong, because apparently that's the concession they put to freeze the conflict in Kherson, Zaporizhia, give all of the Donbass in, and stop the war. But I believe that at that time, the Russians were still saying no long-range missiles on Ukrainian soil. Now, what happens if the Americans come back and go, okay, Russia's got to go, yeah, but the flamingo's got to go. And the Americans will say, well, that wasn't part of the deal. That wasn't part of the spirit of Alaska. The Russians are in a bind right now. They're in a very big bind because they can't, and as the SVR's intelligence suggests, you can't let the flamingo last because they will convert it to a nuclear deterrent capability. So this has complicated things tremendously. It's not a good day to be Russian policymakers right now because they have some very complicated problems facing them.
And I'm a while back things happened, and I said, if I were Russian, you got to take the whole Black Sea coast. You got to take a land bridge to Transnistria. And a while back, now I'm not in charge of the Russian military by any stretch of the imagination. They don't listen to me, but I'm like, yeah, I'd take Ukraine. I couldn't leave anything of this left. You know what I mean? It's now I can't leave it. Kiev. I think they've said it's got to be a regime change operation. They've said we can't have a Nazi state that hates us. And then every time they say, okay, well, the deal has to include rights for Russian speakers and people who worship at the Russian Orthodox Church. And Ukraine's answer is always, we're going to pass a law to crack down harder on Russian speakers in the Russian Orthodox Church. So I think they're at a point now where they kind of leave the Russians with no choice.
Well, it looks that way. I mean, even though Vladimir Putin in June of 2025 said that he was going to, he put down the rules of basically that the war would end based upon the March-April 2022 Istanbul communique modified to represent, to reflect the present day reality. That's what he agreed to. We saw a map in the Russian general staff during the briefing, and the map showed Odessa and Mykolaiv as being part of Russia, Novaya Russia. That was sort of interesting because that's an official government map. And you're like, huh, why would they do that? And now, if you take a look at what the Russians are doing, they are isolating Odessa from the rest of Ukraine, isolating it in terms of the utilities, etc. They're beginning a campaign of breaking down the defenses around Odessa. You have Ukrainian military commanders saying if the Russians complete their breakthrough near the Kramatorsk and Slavyansk area, it's not just that there's nothing stopping them going to the Dnieper River, but they'll be able to pivot and make a move to recapture Kherson and now move on to Odessa. And there's a lot of people who are saying that Odessa is going to be at risk sometime this year. Just speculation. I don't know what the Russian, but you look at the Telegram channels and there's rumors of the Russians building up massive reserve capabilities that give them the ability to strike in Sumy up north, and then to strike at Odessa at the same time. Probably not the same time. Probably strike at Sumy decisively, get the Ukrainians to commit their reserves, and then come crashing through to Odessa, and there won't be anything left to plug the hole. But my point is that we're no longer talking about freezing the front lines. The Russians now are talking about something else, except we're planning on going to Russia. We've made no bones about that. And people, thank you for your support. Please continue to support. Go to scottritter.com, the donation page. We're almost there. But I'm trying to, set up some work for us in Moscow, to do panel discussions, this, that, and the other thing. And one of the feedback that I got is, Scott, just some people are nervous about the stance you're taking against Trump. In Russia, the spirit of Alaska is still very much a real thing. And there's concern that, you coming here and people talking to you, that it could be seen as undermining the spirit of Alaska. And I'm like, well, guys, I don't badmouth my country outside of the borders. Yeah. I don't do it. But that doesn't, the point I'm bringing this up is, we're sitting here talking about expanding the war here, expanding the war there. These are military contingencies that the military is preparing for. But politically, it appears that Russia is still very much trying to get Alaska implemented, at least from an official standpoint. So who knows what's going on? This is a very, very complicated situation. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Well, speaking of which, Scott, you mentioned scottritter.com, and there may be somebody who's been living under a rock for the last 500 years who hasn't seen scottritter.com. You got all kind of good things going on there. Now, here's something important, and Scott mentioned it. He's got a donate button, and you can go here. All kind of things going on there, but you can click on donate. I know, you guys are always watching Scott Ritter. He's always doing stuff. He's on all kinds of, shows on a daily basis.
If you look down where you're at, go past Chocolate Puppy's Nice. You'll see I have a new Russia house out. Trump's foreign policy, right there. Andrei Vajra. It's an interview with Andrei Vajra. I'd recommend everybody watch this. Andrei Vajra is a brilliant political and geopolitical analyst. He's a former Ukrainian intelligence officer who today works in Russia. He does political commentary. A very intellectual man, very sound thinker. And we had a fascinating conversation about Trump's foreign policy from a Russian perspective, how the Russians perceive Donald Trump and his policies. And I would just recommend that to anybody. Again, that's part of, what Garland and I are going to be doing. We're going to be, doing like we did in November, some Russia House style events. We are 3/4 of the way there, guys, in terms of full funding for the trip. And there's things that we can't publicly discuss at this point in time, but there are aspects of this trip that will be mind blowing. When we pull it off, but we can only pull it off with the support of the audience. So if you can go there and click that donate button, you will help Garland and I do some journalistic magic.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. And let me also add this Russia House, you really ought to check this. There's a lot of good stuff that Scott does. This Russia House stuff, let me tell you why you should check it out. I didn't really know how important it was until I started working with Scott and doing these interviews. And you learn things from people inside of Russia. You learn stuff that you couldn't even imagine. I mean, some of the stuff that the people that we were talking to and the things that I was learning, I was like, man, I would think that would almost be classified. For God's sake, they're telling us everything. But the Russians are very open with that, and it was like, wow, these people clearly the government clearly had to say it's okay to say this, that. I'm sure people were briefed, but I was just really shocked with the openness of them, the candor with which they talked to us. And for people like me who didn't know a lot about inside politics, history of Russia, all kinds of things. I mean, we even had a guy this was great. We had a guy who under the Soviet Union, he was in charge of like movies and culture and stuff like that. And he talked to us about what was going on, the changes that he saw, all kinds of stuff. I mean, just stuff you can't put in
the
words.
impact that had on society.
Yes.
Yeah. The role that, movies and intellectual, propaganda, so to speak, has on society and contributed to the collapse of Garland brings it up, and I told Garland this, we, in preparing for the November trip, Alexandra Madornaya is my producer in Russia, and she and I were talking about what kind of interviews we wanted to do. And, we had a list of names. And so, she reached out and she got commitments from people, and we had the list, and suddenly we get an inquiry from above.
Right. Yeah.
and it's hey, who is picking these people to be interviewed? And Alexander's like, well, Scott and me, we're collaborating. Who's telling Scott to pick these people? I don't think anybody. I think Scott and I are working on. Why? And they said, well, individually, we don't have any problem. These people are public figures. They they do interviews and all that. But these people, you're digging deep into Russia when you talk to these people. You're getting deep into Russia. And when you bring them all together, you're getting really deep into Russia. Who is telling Scott to interview these people? Because there was a legitimate counterintelligence concern that somehow I'm coming in under the guise of journal. It was one of the greatest compliments anybody could ever give me, because I'm not going into Russia to spy on them, and they damn well know that. But I am going into Russia. I've always said my mission is to capture the Russian reality and bring it back to the American audience so that the American audience can be fully informed about Russia, so that we can combat Russophobia, which is derived from ignorance. So to have the Russian government say, you're really digging deep here, buddy. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're doing. That's how we defeat Russophobia. That's the importance of what we're doing. Garland and I are going to be digging deep in March. I'm just telling you guys that right now. Trust me, we're digging deep. And, we're going to be bringing things back that nobody has ever brought back to an American audience. That is a 100% guarantee. And the purpose isn't to spy. The purpose is to empower people with knowledge and information. That's what the Russia House does. It's designed to capture the Russian reality, bring it back to an American audience, to empower them so they can be more informed when they talk. So when people like the mainstream media comes out and says X, Y, and Z about Russia, they can go, I don't know. I saw Garland Scott talk to Professor so-and-so, and that's not what he said. Gilbert Doctorow goes out and gets interviewed and says X, Y, and Z. You go, I don't know. I saw Garland Scott talk to, General so-and-so, and that's not what he said. You'll be equipped. So instead of just sitting there nodding, going, Gilbert Doctorow sounds pretty authoritative here. I might run with that. You can go, there's another set of data out there that, brings questions. So that's the importance of what we did. It was one of the greatest compliments I've ever been given. It was indirect. I don't think they meant it as a compliment. But when the presidential administration of Russia says, you're digging really deep here, yes, we are. That's why we are there. That's what we're supposed to be doing. Digging deep, not to spy on you, not to better understand you. A lot of people go to Russia, and I'm not picking on anybody, and I'm not going to say any names, but a lot of people go to Russia, and you can do the circuit. We'll call it the circuit. Okay. Hi, I'm from America. I'm the journalist. Oh, hello, American journalist. Here, have a seat. We're going to bring in Russian A that everybody talks to, and you get to talk to Russian A. It's your first time, so you're pretty thrilled about it. And then they bring you over to Russian B, and you talk to Russian B. But everybody's talked to Russian B. You're having the same conversation over and over and over and over and over again with the same people. You're just changing up the cast a little bit. The people Garland and I talked to, nobody talked to before. Nobody who spoke this kind of English. And the subjects we talked about, and they said that. Remember the professor, the movie guy, he's like, wow, yes. No one's ever asked me these questions before. You guys took me, him, an expert, you took me in a direction I've never gone before. You caused me to think about things. And he had loved it. We interviewed Andrei Ilnitsky, the former lieutenant general, worked for Shoigu. And he said the same thing. He said, this wasn't the conversation I was expecting. It was better. You guys are digging deep. You're asking questions that nobody else asks. You're coming at it from an angle. That's what we do. That's why we're here. That's why we're doing it. So, yeah, support that. And I just want to say one other thing, too. I'm reading comments, and I shouldn't. I know I shouldn't. But there's some people in there that, when I'm asked a question about Iran, I answer the question honestly from a military perspective. But there's some people who read into that thinking that I want this war to take place. I've been to Iran. I've actually gone there. I went there right after Ahmadinejad was elected, back when the Death to America rants were very big in the streets. And I spent more than a week there. That's all I could afford because I went on my own dime. But I fell in love with Iran. It wasn't the country I expected. And I fell in love with the Iranian people. Highly educated people, just very gracious human beings. So anybody who thinks that I would be in favor of a war with Iran, you don't know me. Professor Mirande is he's all over the TV, defending Iran from Western propagandists. If you respect him, and you respect him intellectually and as a human being and as an Iranian, understand this: he and I are best friends. He and I love each other like brothers. He and I talk about these issues. Professor Mirande would not be my friend, would not love me like a brother if he thought that I was about the destruction of Iran, if he thought that anything about what I represents something harmful to Iran. I get invited to Iran on a weekly basis at the highest levels to come over and to visit Iran because they trust me. They believe that I will tell the truth. I already have the FBI knocking on my door about one series of trips I'm making, and until things calm down, I'm not going to encourage the FBI to knock on my door about another series of trips. But I would love nothing more than to go to Iran and to interact with the Iranian people, because it's a wonderful nation, a wonderful people, and when you understand the government, you understand the government's there to serve the people. Don't buy into this crap about slaughtering people in the streets and all that kind of stuff. The Iranian government is singularly focused on the betterment of the Iranian people. They do it through an Islamic Republic filter. It is an Islamic state, so it's a little, the approach is different than here in the United States. But no, I would never wish harm on Iran. So there's a difference between somebody asking me, could the United States suppress Iranian ballistic missile launches with the forces deployed? And when I talk about the tactics and everything, my answer is yes, I think they could. That's an honest military answer. That's not reflective of what I want to happen. When I answer a question, I don't do it to appease an audience. I do it to answer the question honestly. But on the issue of Iran, my heart is with the Iranian people. I wish no harm to them. I wish nothing but good for them, which is why I have continuously said no war with Iran. That's my mantra. No war with Iran. If you ask me a question about what I think a war would look like, I'll answer it because it's an honest answer. But ultimately, I come back to there's no reason for us to go to war with Iran. No war with Iran. The Iranian people are wonderful people. So I just wanted to address that there because there's some people out there that seem to be laboring under the perception that when I answer a question from Garland about the potential of conflict, that somehow means that that's what I want to happen. It's the furthest thing from the truth.
Well, I'll just say this, Scott. The day somebody in the chat called me a white supremacist is the day I started saying, perhaps I should ignore what most of the people ever to throw out some trolls and all.
I just want to tell you guys, I've traveled with Garland. You're right. He's a white supremacist. Yeah. I tell you, he really is. No, I'm joking, but yeah, I get you. Yeah. All right, boss.
All right, everybody, go to scottritter.com and find out everything. And if you can, make sure you donate to keep Scott able to do his important work. Thanks a lot, Scott. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
All right, everybody, share this on all your social media platforms. Thanks to all my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee people and all that. There's my P.O. box. If you want to mail anything there, we're out.